Hello, 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 and welcome to the College of Creation. My name is Dan.
And my name is Michael.
And we are Dungeons & Dragons DMs who love to homebrew items, spells, creatures, and features for D&D. And this is a show where every week we make brand new homebrew content based on prompts that we get from our wonderful community. And now we've been tasked with a monster or a creature. This week we were prompted to make specifically a mutant monster for a no magic post-apocalyptic campaign.
Yeah. It was tricky. This was a tricky prompt.
Yes.
The place that I landed on is not the final form of what I made. I'm sure of it. I don't think what I ended up making is supposed to be a monster. I did include stat blocks to achieve the prompt, but I think when we go in for updates, however many episodes from now, I think that this is not going to include any stat blocks. I think that it transformed over the course of the week into something that is just not something that I can formulate in 5 days.
I also struggled to get to a starting point on this one, I think. And I think it's not to speak ill of the person who gave us the prompt or anything like that. I think it's a very interesting starting point, and I think I can see where like the inspiration for a prompt like this comes from. I haven't really played a lot of the video games that I think are kind of referenced within this. I haven't seen a lot of the movies that I think are referenced in this, like Fallout, lots of post-apocalyptic stuff. Most of the post-apocalyptic stuff that I do engage with, like, does have an element of, like, unreality going on here. Which to me is very hard to distinguish from magic.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where I ended up struggling the most, was like, how do I differentiate this from something that feels like magic? Because it specifically said a no magic campaign, which to me said, okay, then these mutants, this mutant creature, whatever it is, like, was formed not through anything magical or magic adjacent. Like, and this is the weird thing with these sorts of things, is that like are aliens, like if it's an alien source, if it's science fictional, is that magic?
Yeah.
Like does that land into a place that's close enough to magic so as to be indistinguishable? And I don't really think I landed the plane on that, but I couldn't bring myself to like go hyper realistic because I just have a lot of issues with, the game isn't designed for that, right? So if you're talking about a no magic...
So many facets require magic.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing.
If you eliminate magic, you're taking out 65% of the game.
The game doesn't really work as a no magic game.
Yeah, and that line is so thin. Like, the source of the magic matters, right? Because if you think of like divine magic, is that magic, or is that just like a blessing from a deity? Because that could be construed as like, oh, you're following your oath, or you're following my domain, and I'm blessing you with these powers. That's not magic. It's not magic unless it comes directly from the weave. But then primal magic exists, and it's like, oh, well, nature gave you magic, and that's kind of science-y. Like there are cross sections between primal magic and like natural discovery through scientific research. So where do you draw that line? It's all very murky.
Yeah.
So I that's why I think making specifically a non-magic mutant creature, it's going to end up being something different for me, because in order to draw that line for an actual monster stat block, it's very easy. You can just reskin any of the stat blocks that don't have innate spellcasting.
Right.
And you have a non-magic monster, right? You can just say, oh, this is a mutant. It looks ugly, and you're just using the GIF warrior stat block or something like that.
Right.
But on a deeper level, a stat block doesn't have enough breadth to really cover the actual layers necessary to explain why you are non-magic,
Right.
why mutants exist, what happened, what type of apocalypse is happening. Like the prompt was very, very specific. And normally that, like, we've talked about guardrails so many times on this show. Like, guardrails are your friend until you have 4 of them and you're stuck in the middle of a square and you can't go anywhere.
Yeah.
I think it was good as a way to really push myself to think about a very cool narrative setting. Like, I went very narrative for mine.
Yeah.
I liked the prompt in that way. As far as a mechanical prompt, I felt that it was both too difficult and too easy.
and we like a challenge.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And I think that's the same thing that I landed on, though, right? Is that idea of like, what the more interesting part of this creation process is the lore and figuring out what the lore here is, and trying to build in that, like, that why, that how, that, like, what is the thing about this thing that makes it so unnatural. So I just tried to lean into that idea of like the unnatural aspect and lean into the lore and how one might start to build this into a larger adventure, using the sort of starting point of this lore. I ended up getting to a place that I really like, to be really clear. I think I
That's good.
enjoy where I ended up here, and I think it mechanically is supported, and I finally found a clear inspiration point that I got really excited about, and managed to do something that I think is really unique. Well, great. Let me just start by kind of explaining some of my inspiration point here. So when thinking about mutants, my first thought, because this is the person that I am, I was a big comic book guy in my youth. When I think about mutants, especially in the context of something that's like this kind of epic adventure story sort of thing, is definitely the X-Men,
of course,
which I think we touched on in our lead out last time. But like, the idea of mutants having these powers, I think, is very cool, but also leans, I think, a little bit too close to magic, and also leans into that issue that you were talking about of like, you can just reflavor a lot of stuff as like, quote, mutant powers. So how do I differentiate that a little bit and make it feel a little more post-apocalyptic? But I also thought a lot about like the actual ideas that are being explored, both through the ideas of X-Men, which is, the ideas of cultural divides and like societal divides around like things like birth, and the things that separate us, that are like, they become these very complex ideas that various characters through the X-Men have very different theories about, and philosophies about how to address this disparity in society. And then in post-apocalypse, it's a great genre for exploring the ideas of like, where are we today and how do we follow those ideas further out and see where will they get us if we keep on this same track. Where does this thing lead us to ultimately at its worst possible conclusion? And they're all of these things, both in X-Men and when I was thinking about this idea of mutants and stuff, is based around this biology, this unchangeable biology, these like core rules of how biology ought to work, human biology specifically, but like general biology, and something going wrong with that, something shifting in that. So I was like, let me just lean into some of the things that I have found the most terrifying in terms of like bio horror stuff. In society.
That's such a good starting point.
I got really inspired by Annihilation, and just this idea of like everything sort of speeding up turning into this like snowball effect of evolutionary progress that just like explodes into chaos that like is so terrifying because of how quickly it is moving and because of how unpredictable it is. So if you would open up your document, I have brought in a creature called the Evolver. And I'll read you my little preamble, which is where the lore kind of starts and maybe could be a jumping off point for somebody building in an adventure around this. There's something in the water, or perhaps it's in the air. Something alive and replicating faster than we can hope to measure. It's not safe to go out there. If it gets you, if it sees you, if it is threatened by you or you by it, it only speeds up the process. It learns from everything, and its only goal is survival at all costs. Everything you do changes it, and everything it does changes you. But this evolution is unnatural and unstable, and we can only hope we do not live to see ourselves turn into something we cannot recognize.
Yeah.
So we have the Evolver.
Love that.
I resisted for a minute putting in like really strict ideas of like what its stats and what its size, etc. are. I think if you were building an adventure around this, you could be really loose with that. You could have a few different stat blocks based on like size, all of this stuff. Because the idea is that this thing, whatever it is, however it manifests, is incredibly adept at adapting to its environment. So if it needs to be small, it can be small. If it needs to be large, it can be large. I made the basic version just large, a brutish sort of thing. So it's a large aberration. AC of 14, HP of 114. It's got a basic speed. It's got good strength, good constitution, decent dex, not very intelligent or charismatic, but decent wisdom as well. It has damage resistance to poison and cannot be poisoned. It has proficiency in intimidation and perception, and has dark vision as a base. It has a few traits, and these are the sort of core pieces of the stat block. One, and the first one, is an optional trait that I called flexible traits. The Evolver can have 1d4 minus 1 additional traits from the monster features table in Chapter 9 of the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide. They removed this section from the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide, and there are all of these traits that are listed in this long table. So it has optional features that exist within other creatures' stat blocks, things like Brute. There's all kinds of things like this. Etherealness, Enlarge, it has Grappler, it has Legendary Resistances, and things like that. So you can use the option to choose randomly or choose based on the environments and the creatures that the Evolver has encountered previously to give it a couple of extra traits just to kind of make each sort of encounter a little bit unique and a little bit unpredictable. Additionally, it always gains the mimicry trait. The Evolver can replicate sounds or voices that it has heard. A creature that cannot see the Evolver when it does so must succeed an intelligence check to determine that the sound is indeed a facsimile. But then its primary feature is that its hyper adaptability trait. At the start of each of its turns in combat, the Evolver chooses one evolution from the list below. And the evolution lasts until the Evolver dies. It takes on that thing forever. And the idea is if you're running this as a DM, you're making these things responsive. You are responding to something that happened since the last round of combat that directly relates to something it has seen happen, something that has been done to it. It immediately reacts to that and takes on something. So you'd be kind of finessing this as you go to be like, it will choose to do this one. These evolutions include the Evolver's AC increases by 3. The Evolver gains resistance to one damage type that it was dealt to it since the end of its last turn. If it already has resistance to the chosen damage type, it gains immunity to it instead. The Evolver can gain a burrow, climb, or fly speed equal to its walking speed. The Evolver can increase its movement speed by 10 feet. It can gain proficiency in one skill of its choice. If it already has proficiency in the chosen skill, it gains expertise instead. It gains immunity to one condition, either blinded, deafened, paralyzed, or restrained. It gains blind sight to a range of 10 feet. If it already has blind sight, its range increases by 10 feet. Like it just grows an extra eye and can't be blinded or just can see somewhere else. It can gain an additional rend attack whenever it uses its multi-attack action. So it like grows an extra limb suddenly that can also attack. The Evolver chooses one mastery property that applies to all melee attacks that it makes. And if it already has a mastery property, all of the effects stack. So it can just like see you use the slow mastery property and just be like, I can do that too.
I now have this.
Exactly. And the Evolver adds +3 to one ability score of its choice. So, you know, depending on the encounter, it's going to be doing a few of these. It's going to be like switching these around as the encounter goes on. So I don't think any of these are going to get to the point where it's like, oh no, this thing has added its AC by 3, like 5 separate times and now it's impossible to hit. Maybe, but like it's probably going to be responding more effectively and more broadly in sort of a diverse part of this list.
Especially if you, as the DM, are truly playing this reactively. If you're really making a conscious effort to play it the way that it's meant to be played, you're not going to game the system and just every turn bump your AC, because that's not what players are going to do. I mean, well, maybe if you're fighting a bunch of fighters and barbarians, maybe that's what you do. But there's so many options here that it almost doesn't make sense to just do the AC. Like, alternate speeds are far more deadly than big AC, depending on who you're fighting. If you can fly and then gradually increase your movement speed over the course of 5 rounds, that's huge. Blind sight could be huge if you're fighting in the dark. You know, ability scores can be huge too, depending on the traits that you roll. There are certain traits that really capitalize on specific ability scores. I think this is a really good list. It kind of checks all the boxes for what a creature that is hyper adaptable would need.
Yeah.
So I like it.
So, you know, it can shift as the battle goes on. It can change. It can change its tactics entirely. It can give itself a way to escape if it needs to escape. Because again, the thing to focus on is that like the survival is the goal here. Like survival of the fittest, and it needs to be the fittest. It is just rapidly evolving new ways to survive. So as a DM, you should be like focusing on that aspect of the creature and just like whatever its current like primary goal or focus is right now, just lean into that, evolve a better way to do that. And then the next time something comes around, react to that. It's so reactive. It's very responsive. It doesn't have a lot of actions. It has a multi-attack, so it makes 1 charge and 2 rend attacks. Its charge attack deals some bludgeoning damage, and if it moves at least 10 feet in a straight line, it deals an extra 1d10. And then a rend attack that just deals some slashing damage. But again, you can kind of evolve additional things to be going on there, so it could take an additional multi-attack action. A thing I didn't actually add to the effect here, but you could add evolutions as well to say, like, maybe one evolution is that it now, if you wanted to go a little more magical than the non-magical route that I was generally going for, you could say it, you know, gains the ability to deal additional elemental damage when it hits with a melee attack or something like that. So you could add on to this list of effects as you see fit and as makes sense for the world that you're playing in. And then finally, it also has a reaction. Its reaction is called Analysis. The Evolver makes a perception check when it sees a creature within 30 feet of it use a non-spellcasting class feature as an action or bonus action. The DC for this check is 10 plus the target's proficiency bonus. And on a success, the Evolver gains the ability to use that class feature as though it were the same class level as the target creature, but using its own statistics. So examples of this might be
great.
Rage. If it sees the Barbarian rage, it now has the ability to rage with the same number of uses that whatever level Barbarian it is does. It could learn how to second
attack,
wind. It could learn
channel
second
divinity.
wind, channel. It could learn a number of these things as long as they're not spell casting features. It can't learn spells, but it can learn to, do some of the little things that you all are able to do as well.
The only creature that the 2024 Ranger has an advantage over.
Yes, indeed.
You
exactly.
Can't take
no hunter's mark.
spellcasting based class feature.
Can't use hunter's
mark.
mark.
This is really, really nice. I like how well you really adhered to no magic, just danced around it as close as you could get.
I think so much of it comes from the flavor, right? Like so much of it is going to come from how you flavor it. Like this could put this into a magic system, but you could also in terms of non-magic, you just flavor it as more like it is mutating as it goes. It is just changing. Like I said, if it suddenly becomes immune to blinded, well, it just grows like 5 extra eyes, right? Like you have tried to blind it and it just grows an extra eye stalk. You have tried to restrain it and it just like melts a little bit or like suddenly secretes like a very slick oily fluid that makes it very hard to grab onto. Like all of these things can be not mundane exactly, but they can be non-magical, right? They can be effects of its biology in a way that is, yes, unnatural and yes, mutated, but not exactly.
It's not magical.
Not exactly.
Yeah, it's all internal. Yeah, it's all coming from within the creature. One thing that I really enjoy is the implication that the evolutions last until it dies. Mm-hmm. So this could easily be an arc-long threat.
Right, exactly.
Every time you face it. It makes me think of like older Mario games. It brings these older Mario games to mind where you fight the same creature like 10 times throughout the story, and every time you fight them they have better weapons or whatever, because it's a game where you're not supposed to kill anything, right? Like nothing outright dies in front of you on screen, so the characters just get knocked out and they run away and they come back, and this would be such a great analog for that style of play, especially if its intelligence starts boosting. If it keeps adding 3 to its intelligence and starts tracking the players, and you're like, oh, look at this. It's this weak little thing at the beginning of a campaign, but it survives the first fight. And then somehow it survives the second fight. And then it keeps going. And then the BBEG of your entire campaign is the same evolver that you saw on the side of the road that you thought wasn't going to be a big problem, because it has changed and mutated and grown over the course of an entire game. And I think there are very few types of villains that can do that believably, and this is one of them.
I think that would be really cool. I especially think it would be really cool if you lean into the lore part of it and say, like, you're a group that is going out into a dangerous area, and like you may have to try and resist also something getting into you that starts to evolve you. Maybe add an aspect of like, if you do get bitten or something by this creature, like do you have to resist the effect of like something kind of starting to grow like a cancer within you and hitting you with evolutions? And maybe you can, there's a possibility that party members could lean into that and say, I'm willing to accept some level of evolution if it makes me more powerful, but what does that come at the risk of? Again, leaning into that idea in the sort of preamble there of like, Will you see yourself evolving into something that you can no longer recognize, both in terms of a physical form, but also I think there's an implication of, more of a metaphysical, more of a metaphorical something that you don't recognize. What has it turned out that you were willing to do
Right.
for power, for control? Will, in the process of you trying to claim and gain that control, will you in fact lose it? So I think there's a lot of fun implications here that you could explore in like a small adventure that I would love to run and do exactly like you say. Have you encounter this thing early at a weaker level. Maybe it's small
times,
in size. Maybe it doesn't have the
Yeah.
AC yet, but it grows a carapace that improves its AC. It gets better at things very quickly, more quickly than you can understand. And by the end is this horrible monstrosity that you have taught.
Yeah. Created in part by the party's decisions,
Indeed.
which is very cool.
Could be a lot of fun.
Yeah. You could encounter 10 of these and it'd be 10 different monsters.
Yeah. That's what I tried to lean into. So I had a good time with it. How about you? What did you end up with this time around?
Over the course of this week, I have tried to find this one Reddit post that I saw like years ago. And I cannot for the life of me find it again, but it was just like an off the cuff homebrew rule to make a party of superheroes and how you would, within these strictures of Dungeons and Dragons, realistically create a party of superheroes that weren't just like vastly overpowered and good at everything. As we both know, you get like level 9 plus.
Yeah.
And you're a war machine, right? You're an agent of chaos,
Yeah.
regardless of your class, regardless of subclass. But the basic gist of this article was that you don't take a subclass. You just take your basic class features, level up like normal, increase your stats like normal. You can't choose full casters. And you choose 7 levels of spells. And you can cast those spells at will. So you can choose one level 7 spell and cast that spell at will. Or you can choose 7 level 1 spells, cast those spells at will. Any combination of spell casting, as long as it adds up to 7 levels worth of spells. And that's the only magic ability that you have as a player. Counting out warlocks, wizards, clerics, sorcerers, druids.
Dang.
So you are playing essentially as an enhanced human or an enhanced being with one specialty, right? Mm-hmm. One, like a very narrow set of special skills. And so my first idea was to try and wrangle that into some type of set of stat blocks that were just reflavorings of spells that were very narrow, and trying to like fit those into like what spells up to 7 levels could I use to make the Human Torch? Like fly, you need fly as a spell, so that counts out levels 7, 6, and 5. Like what other low level spells could I use to get fire powers? So I have fly and fireball. That really doesn't give me much leeway there. So
Scorching Ray,
like fire shield, Scorching Ray.
Fire shield is a good one.
What are my options here?
Yeah.
So at that point, I was like, I think this is more supposed to be a thought experiment. I would love to try it for a one shot, not something that I think is feasible to make this week. So then I started thinking along the lines of source of power. These creatures that we're making this week have to be viable in combat. They have to have a stat block of some sort, but they can't be magic. What is the source of the power, and why is there no magic? So I decided to conflate the reason for the apocalypse and the reason for no magic into the same thing. And I came up with a first person research-based reasoning for an apocalypse and the recent reemergence of power based on mutation. So I don't know who this character is.
Okay.
Couldn't tell you. But this is a series of... This is meant to be read like a series of like journal entries.
Sure.
From someone who is studying creatures who are experiencing what I am calling, for now, sparks of power.
Okay.
A century has passed since the rupture of the Weave. The wars fought across the plains bled dry our sacred source of magic and plunged the world into chaos and darkness. Without the means to fabricate the fruits of their desire on a whim, many practitioners of old magic soon died out. Only the strongest and most cunning among us were predisposed to survive, but even they grew weary and frail eventually. The governments that relied on the energy of the arcane to function failed us, and soon we all failed each other. The natural world, however, has a way of achieving balance. Within the past decade or so, pockets of energy have appeared across our lands. Fleeting as they may be, they are still noticeable. Many go unaccounted for or unexplored, but enough have been documented now that I have coined these events sparks of power. I know enough now to divulge to you all that these sparks are occurring within those around us. The world needs magic and has decided to mutate those friends, neighbors, siblings, strangers into something new. These creatures are granted abilities that have not been seen since the rupture. A weave for the new age.
I really like that you have gone with a post-apocalypse within the magical world itself.
Yeah.
Like within the world of the Weave, where I did not even think to like say, let's do a post-apocalypse where magic doesn't exist but previously did.
It did before.
Which I think that's a great setting for some sort of story. I think that could be a very interesting, maybe an interesting D&D campaign starting point. Even though I think it would be really hard to play the game without magic. But like setting it in a space where like magic doesn't work anymore is very interesting.
Well, this is where it deviates a little. So this should not be monsters. The thing that I made this week should not be monsters. Again, I did include some stat blocks at the end, but I think it should be one of two other things. The first is a setting, flat out, just like,
that's kind of cool.
This is a campaign setting that can be built in to any type of game. It allows for a lot of time jump opportunities, which are very cool. It allows for a lot of legacy, like characters that finish a game and then start a new campaign. It can be in the same world after this happens, and their previous characters can be referenced. It allows for a lot of like legacy connections. So I think it could be a setting.
Have the players make characters that are super high level magic users, and then like they're in the middle of a fight and their magic stops working.
Yeah, just the power cut off.
Nothing works anymore, and then you time jump who knows how long into the future, and they're not those characters anymore. I love it.
The other thing that I was thinking, which I've tried to do this before, a week is not enough time to do this. I think this could be a class, and I don't know what avenue to take to get there, but I have a few starting points and 6 potential subclasses, which I'm going to talk about now. I've developed a theory. In every creature that experiences a spark of power, there is a source, the vast majority of which are external. Something happens to or around the subject that leads to the spark. It's interesting stuff, for sure. If only I knew more about why this happens. In any case, I've grouped these external sources into 3 generalized areas for ease of documentation. Extraplanar sparks, gifted sparks, or traumatic sparks.
Okay.
So the first one here. A subject is paid a visit by some type of otherworldly being when they experience an extraplanar spark. This is the rarest type of external event. A few examples of extraplanar sparks might be gods returning to the material plane to check on their followers, extraterrestrials from the astral sea, and demons crawling up from the hells. For gifted sparks, not too much more common are the sparks given as gifts. Reports have shown that if a creature who has experienced a spark of power wishes, they can transfer their spark to a different creature. What does this transfer entail? I've never seen one with my own eyes. I wish I knew. And then the traumatic sparks. Far and away the most common of these external events is some type of physical incident. I interviewed one boy who was struck by lightning. After a week's stay in the medical ward, he could harness the power of a thunderstorm as if it was a sixth sense. Research has uncovered subjects hit by vehicles, burned in fires, bitten by insects, and so much more. Very curious, very interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Then we move over to the other three options, all of which are internal.
Mm-hmm.
They continue. Though there is much research still to be done, I've narrowed down a few subjects who swear by the gods that nothing adverse happened to them externally at the time of their spark. I've socked these away in separate files for further research. These subjects seem to have had an innate event occur. I need to meet more of them, but from their stories I've grouped them into the following categories. These are genetic sparks, reactive sparks, and sparks of belief. Simply put, subjects that experience a genetic spark do so before birth. Any creature with at least one parent that has experienced their own spark has a high likelihood of developing powers as well. From what I've seen, the abilities granted are often similar or identical to the parents. For reactive sparks, much like the traumatic external spark of power, a reactive spark is caused by some type of bodily hardship. I've classified these differently because the powers gained here tend to be more neurological. The typical cause of reactive sparks is disease, but some have been linked to the loss of a sense, like sight or hearing. The one causation of the six I have yet to get a real grasp on is the last category, which I reluctantly have titled the spark of belief. Much like the paladins of old, these creatures somehow conjure strength from the ferocity in which they invest in their ideals. If only I could gain such an experience from the intensity of my research.
Oh, maybe you can, unnamed scientist. Maybe you can.
Maybe you can. So this is my idea. Obviously,
Okay.
no stat blocks in sight here. As far as this stuff goes, I think this very well could lead to a mutant adjacent no or low magic class, where these are subclasses. My idea here would be that these subclasses dictate your primary ability score.
Sure, yeah.
Your external spark would be strength, dex, or con. The internal ones would be charisma, intelligence, or wisdom. I don't know how those would break down. I think they would probably have to be altered a little bit to fit into that structure. But I don't know. Again, I think this probably could work best just as a module, and whoever is writing this stuff could either be the party's greatest ally or end up being some type of really dangerous adversary in the end because they possess all this knowledge. So I don't know what this is. I made this, and all week I was trying to discover what it was I was making as I was writing this down, and I still don't know.
It does feel like a class or subclass, but mostly like a class.
I think it's too big for a subclass just because there's a lot of choice.
I'll be honest, Michael, it feels like a sort of post-Forgotten Realms superhero setting, separate, like, spin-off TTRPG sort of situation is what I think you've maybe got the beginnings of
like
here.
That.
Where, like, because you'd maybe want to come up with a whole different system of magic, class features, etc. in general for all of this, right? You'd want to make it feel unique and closer to what you're saying there, right? Those like granted spells, but a limited number of them to fit really closely to a specific theme, because that's what each of these would want to be, right? You wouldn't want to have like access to all spells, but the ones that most closely hew to the concept of this character. And so you'd want to limit it some way, which kind of demands a new system in some ways. Yeah. So that's what it feels like to me, is like the starting points, or like the inception point of potentially an entirely different narrative TTRPG.
Yeah. Well, I've already made a class, so may as well make my own game here.
Hey, they don't have to be complicated to be
That's true.
Fun.
It's true.
So, but yeah, I think
it's always less complicated than high magic.
I think this is a lot of fun. This is a cool breakdown, and I think it also is a very cool breakdown of like superhero archetypes and origins writ large, right? You've kind of loaded in, I think, all of the major origin points that one could point to, right? Like pretty clearly for anything that like is an actual superpower, right?
If nothing else, like that's what I was trying to
Traumatic achieve. Spark being kind of the primary among them, because that is sort of the primary thing of most, at least like Marvel, DC sort of superheroes is something there that is primarily traumatic and external, getting bitten by a spider, flying through a weird space anomaly, like I like that, but I also like that you've added a couple interesting ones. I think the reactive spark is like a nod to something like Daredevil is very, very much like, you're right. That's kind of different. That is decidedly different from
Daredevil. The genetic spark, like there are so many, they're kind of buried in the comics. Not many movies made about them, but like Reed Richards and Sue Storm have children, and they are just granted abilities because their parents have abilities. Or like the extraplanar spark. I'm trying to think like a Doctor Strange type of deal where he goes in search of power and is kind of granted power through study and then the spark of belief. I don't know, I had to like have a catch-all for,
I think spark of belief fits into like the I'm not sure if you've watched like My Hero Academia, but there's superheroes that have like superpowers in that show, like are like genetic superpowers, but there's also kind of the main kid who's not powered, quote unquote, but like because he believes hard enough, he ends up being able to like overcome and basically has superpowers. Like genetically, there's nothing super powerful about him, but at least, at the beginning of the show, genetically, he's like a normie. But like his belief in himself and all of that like allows him to basically function as though he has superpowers in a lot of senses. So it's I think it's kind of in that space, right?
I was also thinking that could be kind of the catching point for any superheroes that don't have innate powers, belief in intelligence or belief in the greater good or belief in themselves, like a Bruce Wayne or a Tony Stark. Like they believe in their own ego or their own technology or whatever that inspires them to like build out and kit themselves out to become heroes without actual changes to their physical body.
Yeah, definitely. Which is certainly not uncommon across superhero stories as well, right? The heroes or the villains who like don't have anything innate about them,
Doc
but like
Ock,
they
the Lex Luthor,
Doc Ock, Lex Luthor, Syndrome from The Incredibles.
Syndrome,
that's the villainous version of very much the same thing, right? The belief in you can create power if you will it hard enough. So I think conceptually this is a very fun starting point, a very fun like. Who knows what it could be, but I think it's got a lot of potential to be something.
I don't know. My plan here is just to like every couple days, maybe like once a week, just open this document up again and see,
just like read through it again. What is this?
Yeah, see if I can chip away at it slowly.
Yeah.
Really, the big part of the pitch today is the lore and what the origin story means for whatever this will be in the future.
Yeah, I think that's pretty cool all around.
Thanks,
Very
man.
neat lore stuff. And a cool starting point for whatever it's going to become. I'll look forward to it.
I don't know. I'm pulled in those two directions,
Yeah.
and I think maybe eventually it'll end up being a little bit of both.
Yeah, like it.
I don't know why my brain keeps telling me to make new classes.
That's okay, you know?
I gotta stop doing that. I gotta stop doing that.
Well, it's very fun, though. I think all around a prompt that I think both of us maybe struggle a little bit with, but that's good sometimes. Challenging ourselves, pushing ourselves into new ideas.
Yeah, figuring out how to fit the prompt, but also kind of stay true to what we enjoy making. Because I certainly don't like feeling like this is ever work.
Yeah.
Or I don't want to feel like I'm forcing myself to do this. So I just, at a point, I just diverted to what is the sauciest narrative thing that I can think of. Why are all these things connected from a story perspective? And then we'll just see where that leads me. And I don't think it led me to a definitive ending point, but it definitely gave me a good start.
Well, Michael, should we roll for our next prompt?
I think so.
I will pull up our big D20 homebrew prompt list. And for our listeners, if you've got a prompt that you'd like to hear us make on this show, something that you'd like to have us take a swing at, we'd love to hear it. We'd love to add it here to our growing list. You can send those over to collegeofcreationpod@gmail.com, or you can come on over to the Patreon. That's patreon.com/collegeofcreationpod, and you can join at the free tier, see everything that we've ever created, and you can get in touch with us there. We'd love to see you, and we'd love to hear from you. Michael, what do we got today?
Today we are making number 12.
Ooh, I don't have a person that this came from, but this prompt is create a new damage type.
Oh. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Interesting. Very, very, very interesting. I'm going to have some things to think about here. I have to imagine that this is going to be not dissimilar to our conversation a couple weeks back that we had about constitution-based skills. It's not all that complex of a creation process, but it's the concept that is the interesting part here. So maybe we'll have a similar conversation, I think.
It's like, what is the justification for a new damage type? We talked about it a little bit last week with the Pokemon stat blocks, like with your Pokemon trainer. How do you take the world of Pokemon and put it into D&D when Pokemon has such a complex damage map,
right?
With resistances and immunities and vulnerabilities, and like there's no way that many specific typings would work mechanically in D&D. So what's the justification for adding more than we already have? But we did talk about specifically water damage.
Yeah, there's no water damage type.
Things that exist in other games that make sense within those other worlds that possibly could make sense within D&D. We just need the reasoning why those damage types have a justification to be made, you know?
Yeah, and so maybe I think we'll discuss in greater length the concept of damage types in general, and like adding complexity to how we calculate and how we think about damage. Maybe more than we'll talk about the actual creations, because they'll be just smaller creations. They won't be a full stat block. We don't have to create anything like that for a new damage type.
Right.
We'll have a good discussion, I'm certain.
Absolutely.
But until then, folks, we will talk to you later. Michael, do you have anything to say to the people before we say goodbye?
I do have something to say. Strangely enough, I racked my brain this week to try and figure out what to make for this prompt because it was so specific. Very clearly, I did not come with a finished product as far as what the prompt asked for. I posit to you, listeners, that even if you only come to the table with a starting point, that is enough of a finished product for most players. If you come to a session 0 or even a session 1 and you start a campaign without an idea of where it's going, that is totally fine. Totally fine. Most of the time, your ideas for what the ending of your game is going to be are going to be wrong anyway, because your players are going to make sure that somewhere along their way, your story changes. That's okay. It's totally fine to be flexible. It's good to be flexible. Almost all the time now in new games that I start, I will intentionally not have things planned for like the back half. I'll have plot threads that I kind of cast out, and if the players latch onto them and they run through the entire game, great, fantastic. But if they don't, the back half of the campaign can be built together. And same goes with things that you make. So don't be afraid of not having all the answers and not having everything tied up nicely with a bow. Because most of the time, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. It's always okay to say, hey, gang, I don't have enough familiarity with what's going on here. I haven't built this part yet. So
yeah.
Be patient with me. Maybe we'll cut the session here, or maybe you can go in a different direction for now and come back later. But we all know we're creating this all together in the moment. We're all doing this improv experience together. So give your players a little bit of grace. Players, give your DMs a little bit of grace in that space as well. And you'll come up with something great all together eventually, I'm sure. Michael, thanks for that. Thanks for potting with me. Everyone else, thanks for listening so much. And we will talk to you next time. Until then, goodbye.
Goodbye.